Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Monday, June 3rd, and we have a packed show all across the world of sports today, where we're going to be starting off. The NBA Finals are upon us this week. Tips off officially on Thursday, so we're going to take a look at some of the betting lines ahead of the series and some of the key storylines that we touched upon some on Friday, but sort of diving back into, as we get closer to this thing, what are the determining factors going to be as to who takes it home. Then we're going to be talking about Justin Jefferson, who just received the largest contract in NFL history for a player that is not a quarterback. We're going to dive into the ramifications of that, both with the Vikings and the wide receiver market across the league. Then we are going to be talking about a little bit of a weird weekend in the WNBA, where Caitlin Clark received a pretty significant check foul from one of the Chicago Sky's players. So this idea of, do the other players in the WNBA have some type of resentment towards Clark? We're going to be diving into that conversation. We're going to be doing a preview of the NHL Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals. They officially tip off on Saturday as well. So we're going to be diving into both the Panthers and Oilers, who advanced to the finals over this past weekend. And then finally, we're going to be doing some storylines surrounding NBA offseason and the free agents to come. So a whole lot to get to today, but before we dive into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports, as we try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation and would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcpodcast.net. When you leave a tip or donation, you can leave a comment as well. That will pop up on the screen and we will address it immediately. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that end. The NBA Finals tip off on Thursday, so want to sort of, as we are going to maybe slow play a little bit, we were very NBA Finals heavy towards the end of last week, so I wanted to sort of take a different angle today and look at some of the interesting betting odds and such, and how this stacks up historically in terms of where we are at here, because the Boston Celtics have been, pretty much a wagon all season long. And yes, we have plenty of times acknowledged the fact that they definitely benefited in the postseason from an easier playoff path. But the reality of the situation was that coming into this season, we knew it was the Boston Celtics Eastern Conference to lose. And they didn't, and they cruised their way through it. Again, you want to dive into the topic of conversation about the level of difficulty, all power to you. But at this point, again, I think that we sort of knew where the Celtics were in comparison to their opponents in the conference, and they steamroll their way to get here. Facing an unlikely opponent, though, in the Dallas Mavericks, a 5 seed coming into the playoffs, went on the road in every single one of these series and were able to do so, I wouldn't say with ease necessarily. The Clippers definitely pushed them some in the first round. There is a legitimate argument to make that the Thunder, had they just hit their open looks, they could have very easily, and some people are sort of pointing to that foul on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at the end of that game against PJ Washington as to, that falls differently. Maybe the Mavericks aren't in this position, but again, you can sort of play the playoff path game, but at the end of the day, the Mavericks are here, and a lot of people are picking them to win this series. Vegas is not, though. The Celtics are minus 210 favorites. Mavericks are plus 175 as of this morning to be the NBA champions this season. Bill Simmons of The Ringer put out a stat about since the merger, the NBA-ABA merger in 1976, if the Mavericks were to win this series, they would be the third biggest underdogs to win the NBA Finals. I believe the two teams that he mentioned had longer odds were the 2004 Pistons when they were playing the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, and the 2019 Raptors when they were going up against that Warriors team with Kevin Durant, that obviously injuries ended up playing a piece in that. But again, Vegas does not necessarily see it to be as close of a series maybe as a lot of the public does, because, you know, there's been a ton of momentum sort of building up here with the Mavericks over the course of the past few weeks, and especially doing so against the Timberwolves team that a lot of people, including myself, said that the winner of that Timberwolves versus Nuggets series was going to go on to win the finals, or to win the Western Conference at least, and had a great chance to win the finals. And then the Mavericks came in as just a total sort of matchup with a matchup advantage, and were able to just pick apart the Timberwolves in a way that the Nuggets weren't, and now here they are. I think that the Celtics are much better geared towards... I think that ultimately, when you look at the Timberwolves, and we've talked about them plenty, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but they were a team perfectly built to take down the Denver Nuggets. But we knew that the idea of Rudy Gobert, he could be exposed a little bit more if he's pulled out towards the perimeter, and that's what the Mavericks did all series long. Now, I don't think that there is necessarily that same mismatch when you look at this series against the Celtics. The most comparable one would be Al Horford, who we saw him get torched on a number of different occasions, specifically going back to the Cleveland series against Donovan Mitchell. In the Indiana series as well, we did see Tyrese Halliburton towards the end of Game 1 trying to expose Al Horford a little bit in those same pick-and-roll situations. But one thing that is different coming into this series, and again, it's going to be an ongoing chess match, I think, between Joe Mazzulla and Jason Kidd, two head coaches that a lot of people are not fans of, don't have faith in, but I think have done a tremendous job to help get their teams to this position. You know, I know that Jason Kidd, maybe there's some personality stuff with him that a lot of fans don't necessarily love, but you know, the way that he has been able to reshape this Dallas defense and have their interior force be so dominant, I do believe. And also, you want to talk about, you know, I think that casual NBA fans often sort of try to diminish the role of head coaches, and I won't deny that, you know, it does feel like, in comparison to some of the other major sports, that NBA head coaches might not be quite as important because it's such a star-driven league. But because it's a star-driven league, the one thing that everybody is sort of in consensus about is having control over the locker room and getting players to buy in. And that is exactly what Jason Kidd has done. You know, and also, you know, obviously credit to the front office for making the moves they did to get Kyrie, to get Gafford, to get Washington, even if you want to go, again, that little bit of a tanking route that they went towards the final stretch of last season, for them to be in better position to make a move for Derek Lively in the NBA draft. But we have seen a level of buy-in from the defensive end and willingness to share to some degree, especially, you know, that more so slanted towards Luka, but Kyrie as well, sort of on that same path. Now, I think that Kyrie has been maybe a little bit more humbled over the course of the past couple years. Not that he's not great. We all know that. It seems like Kyrie fans can be a little bit extra sensitive possibly, but I think that it's great now to see that he has fully bought into being a number two. And because of that, the Mavericks have a great chance to win the championship this year. And I think that Jason Kidd does deserve some credit there. So a little bit of a coaching tangent there, but didn't necessarily touch on it all too much during last week's shows. But this is definitely, legacy series. Again, all the pressure and all the attention is on the players, but Jason Kidd and Joe Mazzulla both have done tremendous jobs this season. Want to highlight that and highlight the fact that, they could very easily garner a lot more respect, because as much as the Celtics are the minus 210 favorites and that the Mavericks have been, I wouldn't say full Cinderella, because coming into the postseason, they were talked about as a potential dark horse, but still an unlikely run to the finals, all things considered. And, I think that both of these teams have different sort of puzzle pieces that are going to be tough to adjust to. Now, the defense on Luka Doncic, we talked about that at length during last week's shows. It is always going to be, just about impossible to fully shut him down. But what are those, other pieces going to be in terms of Celtics' very switchable defense? Are they going to be a little bit still in that same, switching defensive strategy during these, screen situations, but are they maybe going to try and make Luka work a little bit harder to get the matchups that he is searching for, and not so sort of flippantly allow Luka to pick and choose who he wants in that pick and roll situation? All of those different types of things. It's going to be really interesting to see, but I want to briefly talk here about the finals MVP odds. Jason Tatum is the favorite as things currently stand as of this morning on DraftKings, minus 115. Best player on the team that is favored to win. Pretty straightforward there. From there, it is Luka Doncic at plus 205, Jaylen Brown at plus 650, and Kyrie Irving fourth at plus 2200. Very, very quickly here on Kyrie, because the chances of him actually winning are slim. But the plus 2200 line, especially considering some of the narratives that are going to come into play with this series in terms of the way that Kyrie, we just talked about it, the change in his maturity level and his willingness to accept a different role for a lot of this postseason run. But let's say the Celtics are completely selling out for Luka Doncic on the defensive end. There are going to be opportunities in front of Kyrie Irving to maybe try and clean up some of the, especially if the Celtics are sending extra pressures, extra blitzes and such. Kyrie Irving may have the other side of the court sort of to himself with numbers. So I'm just saying, especially given the responsibility that Luka is going to probably hold, and that there may be some opportunities opening up for Kyrie with the way that the media is now sort of on a high Kyrie note, he is going to play his former team in the Boston Celtics, which I think is, a little bit more dramatized than his years with the Nets, because it was his first destination after the Cavaliers stint. And it was pretty messy, all things considered, the mesh of him. And again, Boston being the fan base and the market that it is, there was a lot of bad blood there. Joe Mazzulla with an extremely funny quote, just such an interesting guy, but again, youngest head coach to ever make the finals, so definitely accomplished at his age. But he was asked about the Kyrie villain arc and such, and he said that he gave a quote saying, "We're all villains in someone else's eyes." So that was a pretty funny way to sort of downplay the drama there. And Kyrie, on the other end, with his press conferences, I also think that he's done a good job of sort of minimizing that extra noise, and everybody just seems focused on basketball right now, and obviously the media is going to do their things, but this is going to be a terrific matchup in my eyes. Like I mentioned, tips off on Thursday. The Boston Celtics are minus 6.5 point favorites in that game as things stand. That game obviously taking place in Boston. I'm probably going to, sort of sit on it for a couple days in terms of making my official prediction, but my early lean is definitely with the Celtics, and this would be a Monumental seems maybe a little bit dramatic, but at the same time, this is a huge missed opportunity if the Celtics do end up dropping this series, and I believe that they have the personnel to be able to beat the Mavericks. We're going to be doing later this week a top 10 players in the series, and obviously that's not the perfect way to sort of predict how a series is going to play out, but I'm going to be doing some different exercises looking at this series in different ways. Wanted to come out today, though, as we are headed into, the peak of the NBA season right now, and give a little bit of a betting odds perspective. But again, we will be back with far more NBA finals predictions and such, and keys to the series as the week goes on. I recommend to go check out some of the videos that we put out last week as well if you are looking for some extra content there, because there's a lot we have to get to today. So we are going to be taking our first break right now, and when we come back on the other side, we had a monumental contract extension signed this morning between Justin Jefferson and the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to be breaking down all of the details, the effect it will have on what the Vikings are trying to build for the future, and how it could in turn affect the remainder of the wide receiver market, as we have some big names that are still hanging out there hoping for new contracts. So we're going to be touching on all of that. Stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. This morning, we saw the Minnesota Vikings agree to a contract extension with Justin Jefferson that makes him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. So, want to dive into now some of the details surrounding that. It is a 4-year contract worth $140 million with $110 million guaranteed. It is going to approximately be $35 million per season in terms of annual value. I'm sure we will get some additional details in terms of the actual breakdown of those numbers as well in the coming hours, but like I mentioned, becomes the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, and I do think that it is absolutely justified. I understand that we are sort of still, maybe you could argue, a little bit new into this very heavily paid wide receiver era, where we've seen a number of free agent wide receivers get paid this offseason, and not just free agents, but a lot of contract extensions as well. A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, Michael Pittman Jr., all of these names in the past month or so that have showed that there is definitely a shifting, especially when you look at the running back market in comparison, where the longevity and the guaranteed money on those deals in comparison to these wide receiver deals. We already knew that this was something that's been happening, but again, the money, value of these contracts is really starting to back up how we sort of feel about these the importance of these positions from a national standpoint, and definitely shows where the coaches' heads are at in terms of understanding the value of the position. And wide receiver, obviously, wasn't always that way. That you have the great quarterback, and everybody wants to have the great quarterback, but it's just such a harder fix there, that the easiest way to sort of find out whether or not the quarterback is a viable option is to make sure that he has viable options around him in those prove-it years. And that's exactly what the Vikings decided to do in this offseason, making sure that they secured their franchise wide receiver to see whether or not JJ McCarthy, who they moved up to take with the 10th overall pick, is going to be worth that investment long term. Because ideally for them, they would be paying JJ McCarthy this big contract too if he pans out throughout his rookie contract. But again, we've seen it, I think that there has never been, especially in today's age, a specific position in any sport that needs to be, I wouldn't say catered necessarily, but the development process is just so much more crucial for quarterback, it feels like, because of the mental capacity that it takes, especially on the biggest league in America. You could say the NFL is. I don't think that that's very debatable. NFL has been king, and it will be for, some time. But to the difficulty of position, added with the fact that there is so much scrutiny that comes with it, it's just so important for these franchises to make sure they set up their quarterbacks in the best possible position. We saw 5 quarterbacks selected in the first round of 2021. 4 of them are already on different teams. And, some were more of a case of lack of talent than others, but at the same time, you can point to a number of different things throughout this process in terms of where the franchises sort of did these quarterbacks wrong. And the Vikings now, like I mentioned, are getting off in the right direction of making sure they lock down Justin Jefferson. And again, JJ McCarthy, not somebody that I was fully sold on in terms of, his NFL. He's got the NFL potential. I just think that his floor is also a lot lower as well. So I'm excited to see it and how it plays out. Definitely in the comment section, let us know how you feel about JJ McCarthy as a prospect. But he's going to have some weapons around him early on in his career with him and Jordan Addison, who they took the wide receiver in the first round last season as well. So there are going to be some options. TJ Hawkinson, of course, who I believe he was dealing with an injury down the stretch of last season. Also, fact check me on that if I'm off base there. But again, 3 really nice pass catching options for JJ McCarthy moving forward. But I want to talk a little bit about the bigger picture wide receiver market, because like I mentioned, we have seen all of these different star wide receivers get paid this offseason. And as much as, like I talked about, this is an example of the league is shifting to this pass-heavy offense. And as we acknowledge that, obviously the quarterback is important, but you can also still make do, especially with a good scheme. And I'm not going to dive fully into some of the quarterbacks that I have full doubts about right now, but when you look at the likes of and this is maybe unfair, I'm just saying, Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, these quarterbacks that maybe some people have questions with. I feel better about Purdy than I do with Tua, but they have been able to showcase some of their upside because of the fact that their teams have surrounded them with weapons on offense. And that's definitely the right way to go about it, which does mean that wide receivers are only going to continue to get paid more and more. That's why the Vikings making sure they got out ahead of this Justin Jefferson situation sooner rather than later is crucial, because there are some other really big name wide receivers on the market. And, Justin Jefferson, I do believe, should be the highest paid receiver in the NFL. He's already made all-pro teams in 3 of his first 4 seasons. He was the Offensive Player of the Year in 2022. He is a tremendous, tremendous talent that the Vikings can look to build around for years to come. And that being said, just because I think that he should be the highest paid doesn't mean the CeeDee Lambs and Jamar Chases of the world shouldn't also get theirs. And I believe I saw a report that Jamar Chase was actually waiting out the Justin Jefferson situation a little bit to see how much he could make. Now, the Bengals are definitely, we've talked a ton about the Bengals this offseason just with the T. Higgins contract holdout and a trade as well. So there's a lot of people that the Bengals have to pay. Jamar Chase is now going to be looking at that number, $35 million per year, and he's going to think that he deserves to be in that same threshold. Now, give or take $1 million, $2 million in that full $140 million deal, but he's going to be trying to get his, just like Jefferson is now getting. That obviously makes things a lot more difficult for T. Higgins. And I've said before, I think that this is going to be a situation where Higgins doesn't necessarily have all too much leverage over the Bengals right now in terms of him holding out for the upcoming season. I think he's going to play out this last year on the franchise tag with the Bengals. They're going to try and compete for a Super Bowl, and then he's going to walk in free agency next year and maybe do some type of a sign and trade situation, but ultimately that's how I think it's going to play out there. The Cowboys are also an extremely difficult situation because it's only one wide receiver looking for money, but it's one wide receiver, one quarterback, and one cornerstone defensive end / linebacker in Dak Prescott and Micah Parsons as well. So I think that they're going to have a lot on their hands. And CeeDee Lamb is excellent. I do think Justin Jefferson is a notch above him. CeeDee Lamb is going to get paid that type of money, but if I'm the Cowboys, I probably would have a little bit more reservations in terms of being willing to dish out all of that type of money. Now, maybe they do so in the offseason and then eventually trade him. I think that a trade is very much on the table. And listen, I'm not the number one Dak Prescott fan in the world, but I do think that he's a top 10 quarterback in the league. I'm going to leave it at that I think he's a top 10 quarterback. Off the top of my head, I don't want to necessarily rank him through with some of the others in the NFL, but he does also deserve to get paid. And I don't know if the Cowboys are necessarily in the level of contention right now that they should be dishing out all of this money to a Dak Prescott and a CeeDee Lamb. But ultimately, I think that Dak is probably good enough that he can make do without CeeDee Lamb. What does CeeDee Lamb really do for your franchise if you're the Cowboys specifically, when the backup quarterback is Trey Lance, who, I would love to see him have a redemption, but the Cowboys just have no backup option at quarterback. This is a thought that I've put out there multiple times, and I don't think the Cowboys are an easy fit by any means, but I think that, or an easy fix is what I should say. I don't know, whatever. But ultimately, I don't know. I don't think that I can justify paying CeeDee Lamb that type of money, especially with all of the people that they just left walk in this past offseason. They were trying to save a little bit of money. Now, maybe that was money that they were hoping to, reallocate into CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep every one of them. But again, Cowboys, it's a weird situation there. They're good, not great. How do you sort of get out of that little bit of stagnancy of being a 10-plus win team every season and trying to elevate yourself while also sort of navigating through all of these financial situations that surround the team? So again, give us your thoughts in the comments section, but there's going to be a lot to unpack with the Cowboys for sure, the Bengals as well. But again, ultimately at the end of the day, have to feel really good for Justin Jefferson and this Minnesota franchise, where you lose out on Kirk Cousins during the offseason, and I can't guarantee that JJ McCarthy is going to be a hit for them, but they are doing a very solid job, I think, of putting the talent around him. They're going to find out, and they are definitively going to find out in terms of, if the offensive line needs a little bit of work. I don't love the running back room, but if JJ McCarthy can play in the NFL, the Vikings are going to find out by the end of his rookie season, and that, I think, is the big thing for the team. Again, whether it'll be good or not, we will have to see, but I do believe they're going to have some definitive answers. But that is all we have time for on this subject. We are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other end, it was a little bit of a wild weekend in the WNBA. All kinds of controversy surrounding Caitlin Clark versus the rest of the league, which has become a pretty common theme so far in her WNBA career. So we're going to be diving into all of the drama and give some thoughts on all of that. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As the WNBA continues to grow and more eyes are on it, in large part thanks to the star talent that has come in with this past rookie class, most notably Caitlin Clark, a lot of fans are sort of noticing some animosity between other established WNBA stars and Caitlin Clark. And, we have seen Clark take some hard hits throughout her early career here in the WNBA. There was a shooting foul in her first game where she hit the floor really hard. She ran into a monster screen a couple games later, but over the weekend it sort of took itself to a new level, where on Saturday the Indiana Fever faced off against the Chicago Sky, and during that time it was Kennedy Chandler who, after a made bucket from Chicago, was sort of barking at Caitlin Clark and then ran up to her. Looked like it, we have all types of professional lip readers on the internet. Looked like B word might have been thrown in there, and then body checked her to the floor. And this was just on, an inbounds play right before the end of the third quarter. And it was definitely, a lot of animosity on that play. And it was initially ruled a common foul. Caitlin Clark asked the refs to go back and look at it. They didn't necessarily in the moment, but the league did go back and review it, and they called it a flagrant foul. For Clark, I think that it was, for her, she has been very professional through the start, and again, it's a little bit of a debate as to whether or not there is a target on her back. We have some comments from Becky Hammon that sort of go against that idea. But, regardless, through all the physicality and everything, Clark has made sure that she hasn't necessarily painted a bigger target, and, again, has been, pretty classy throughout. She gave a quote in this game in reference to Chandler's hit. Quote, "I wasn't expecting it. It is what it is. It's a physical game." Just sort of, not making any sort of a bigger deal out of it, which from her perspective is probably a good thing because, and that'll sort of like keep, as it comes into this conversation, the Fever have just done a horrendous job of actually protecting her. And I think that it's ridiculous to see, Chandler come out and wreck her. Aaliyah Boston, who was the number 1 overall pick for the Fever last season, she won Rookie of the Year. The Fever have struggled for the most part. They end up winning this game, actually, for their second win of the season, I believe, second or third. And, they're supposed to be the future of this team that is absolutely, rebuilding at this point. And Boston just sort of like casually walked over to her and helped her up, but just no sense of urgency whatsoever. Meanwhile, you see the quarter end up expiring, and when Chandler's running back to the bench, Angel Reese comes onto the court to greet her with this big hug for laying down what was a cheap shot. And again, that's a whole different conversation, and it goes far beyond just Boston in terms of who should be stepping up for her. I don't think that we're ever necessarily, who knows ever, but if we're seeing the goon role sort of be taken out of the NHL to some degree, I can't imagine we're going to see, that true enforcer type in the WNBA. But it's just about pride. Like, somebody on your team has to step up, and nobody has yet. And I find that incredibly weird. Listen, there are a lot of strange sort of underlying conversations that go along with Caitlin Clark coming into the WNBA that can be a little bit uncomfortable. But at the same time, once you're in those lines of the court, you got to have your teammates back. And unless we find out something in the near future about how Clark isn't a good teammate, I kind of find that hard to believe. So, Fever, Matt Barnes went out and said that they should be ashamed, I think is the word to use. It's pretty accurate. But, ultimately, I think that just to sort of wrap up at least this specific situation between Chandler and Clark, Chandler, who, let's face it, the majority of people in the country had no idea who she was until this instance, which is, sort of a statement of we need more attention around the WNBA, and it's definitely coming this year and will be for the time to be. But it's because she gets into it with Clark, who is sort of, LeBron himself said it. She is the reason, to some degree, why all of these people are going to start tuning into WNBA games. And it's why when the Fever go on the road, these, hosting cities are putting the teams in bigger arenas because they know that they can more likely sell them out. So there is no denying the impact that Caitlin Clark is going to have on the WNBA. And Chandler has to know this, even though she continued to sort of, continue on this conversation where she came into the press conference afterwards and she said she wasn't going to answer any questions about Caitlin Clark. But then multiple times over the next couple days, she's on social media interacting to Caitlin Clark content where she was reposting tweets about how she supposedly owns Caitlin Clark. And there was even a clip that was put out there that Chandler reposted, and it was questioning whether or not Caitlin Clark flopped on it. You may have seen there was a box out play between her and Angel Reese, and Angel sort of came with an elbow. It was pretty light, though. Ultimately, I think it very well could have been a flop. But if you're Chandler, what are you doing reposting that? And then she's talking about how, oh, well, I'm not the one who lives rent-free, or she's not the one who lives rent-free in my head, it's the other way around. It's like, well, why are you posting so much about her if you don't actually care that much? And she commented under another post, said, quote, "Beside three-point shooting, what does she even bring to the table, man?" in reference to Clark. So, again, I myself, I feel like with the rest of the world are sort of diving more into enjoying WNBA content, and it's been enjoyable. I don't like Chandler. I'm just, and that's almost a good sign for the WNBA that we are getting some villains popping up. And, every good league has a villain. So if that's what Chandler wants to sort of establish herself as, go for it. I'm definitely not going to like it. Cheap shots are just, it's one thing to talk smack, and even if you do want to go on social media and sort of throw yourself a little victory lap if you feel like you had a better game, even though they lost, by the way, like I mentioned, the Fever, who are now 2-9 after getting their doors blown off on Sunday against the Liberty, they still won the game too. You would think that the Sky beat Caitlin Clark, but no, that just wasn't even the case either. But I just don't think that cheap shots like that are ever necessarily in play. Now, again, if it's going to get physical, so be it. Someone on the Fever's got to step up in those instances. But like I sort of alluded to earlier, this has been a conversation since the first game and that shooting foul that I mentioned. And Becky Hammon, the head coach of, I believe she's with the Las Vegas Aces. She is. And she talked about the narrative that is currently, coming out about WNBA players that don't like Caitlin Clark. She said that that's not a reality or anything. I definitely have a hard time necessarily fully buying into that. The reality of the situation is, Caitlin Clark shouldn't be treated like royalty by the league or by her peers, because as much as, yes, she is massively to credit for the uptick in WNBA viewership that we've seen so far this season, she also hasn't proven anything in the league yet. And that's why I do think it is a conversation about pride of these other established players that are sort of ticked off about all the love that Caitlin Clark gets, that she gets this massive shoe deal that is far more than they're ever going to make, at least at the current pace of how much WNBA contracts are. And I can understand, egos get in the way of things oftentimes, not just in sports, but in life. So I can understand some animosity from that point. What I will say is, if you're going to have that animosity, just say it with your chest. Angel Reese is somebody who is, when asked about Caitlin Clark, always seems to be pro her. We don't hate each other or anything. But she's always ready with these subliminal shots. And it's just, I don't know. It's kind of petty. And that's at least how Charles Barkley described it. And if you want to be a villain, and if you don't like Caitlin Clark, just say it. No one's going to stop you. Yeah, people might be, oh my God, I can't believe they said it. But at the same time, you're not being phony. You're living up to who you are. And I'm not saying Draymond Green should be a role model, but Draymond has been very upfront about his feelings through everything. And as much as I think it's been a lot of him as of late, at the same time, he is who he is. And to some degree, we accept him for it. Now, this past year was obviously over the top, and you want to go back to him punching Jordan Poole and such. There's definitely a line that shouldn't be crossed, and Draymond always knows how to play that line. But, he's a tremendous defensive player, and he's going to be a Hall of Famer, and he did so by acknowledging that he has an edge, and it's no friends on the court. So it's interesting. Again, ultimately, at the end of the day, Clark wasn't injured, so it's no harm, no foul, and it is building up just more intrigue in the league. So it's definitely not bad for the league by any means, but I also feel like we're being a little bit disingenuous if we are denying the idea that there are some WNBA players who have been playing on pretty cheap contracts because the WNBA hasn't, been bringing in the revenue that is, that they hope, considering the level of talent. Again, Caitlin Clark, it was clear that as much as she was an all-time college player and she's still very good in the league, that she's not the best player in the WNBA from day one. And I think that a lot of people sort of had that realization watching her first few games, and that's because there are a lot of stars, legitimate stars in the WNBA that just haven't gotten any of the recognition, half as much of the recognition as Caitlin Clark has. And I think that, again, some egos can be a little bit fragile, but as long as these WNBA players do understand that they can't be putting, Clark out of commission. They can't be ending her career because, they do to some degree need her in the league. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Glad we're at a point now where we can talk some WNBA and that we can criticize WNBA players as well, because before it was all about uplifting. It's all right to see that there's a little bit of a dirty side as well. But we are going to be shifting gears here to the NHL. We have an official finals matchup that I want to dive into, talk about the action from this past weekend that put the Oilers and the Panthers against one another in the finals. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Over the weekend, we saw the finales of a couple NHL conference playoff series, and it is going to be the Florida Panthers and Edmonton Oilers facing off in the Stanley Cup Finals. The puck drops on Saturday to officially kick off this series, but want to go over some of what we saw over the weekend that put these teams in this position. So it was both of these teams finishing it off in Game 6. Was an unbelievable conference finals from the perspective of both of these series in an entertainment standpoint. So that was, really encouraging to see that it was an elite Final Four, and now we have, very possibly the two best teams in the NHL facing off against one another. The Panthers going back to the finals for the second straight year, while the Oilers, in this curse around them and really Canadian franchises, when you look at the history of the past, 20 plus years of the success Canadian teams have had in the playoffs, that they are back in the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time since 2006. So, starting briefly here with the Panthers, they finished off the Rangers on Saturday night with a 2-1 win. There was definitely a clear sort of, I would say to some degree, solidarity of they understood that this was, last year it was a celebration for winning the Eastern Conference, and they were riding this extreme high. This year, happy to be there, but they also understand that the job is most certainly not finished, and they learned that the hard way last year against the Vegas Golden Knights when they lost. But very quickly here as well, on the note of the Rangers, great season for them. The President's Cup trophy curse, though, does live on, where they had the most points in the regular season, and it seemed like they were in a very good position to come out of the Eastern Conference this season, but they were unable to do so. Igor Shesterkin was unbelievable for them through their first few games. You can, make an argument that he basically put together the performances in goal in games 2 and 3 that he almost helped the Rangers steal those games, both of which coming in overtime. And it was, really encouraging to see. But then on the other end, we've seen Bobrovsky and the dominance that he's been able to put together. And in large part, Bobrovsky, he's been incredible. Now, it's, I guess, sort of this stupid idea of like a blame pie. How do you want to sort of divvy up who is responsible for all of this? Because we know the Panthers, their forecheck, the style that they play with their physicality and aggression, that they do make things extremely difficult for opposing teams to really dominate the time of possession in the offensive zone and such, and that was part of it. So give credit to the other players on the Panthers. The Rangers, to some degree, Zibanejad and company, to have that sort of fall off in production was definitely disheartening for them. But again, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to Bobrovsky, who was just incredible throughout this series, and it's definitely going to be the number one advantage, I would say, for the Panthers heading into next series, is the goaltender matchup between Sergei Bobrovsky and Stuart Skinner. Now, Skinner, I've been a little bit critical of him throughout this postseason run, but he put together maybe his best game, at least, in the biggest game this past weekend in their closeout. But sort of before we move on to that series, just the Panthers, they're not everybody's favorite team. They're definitely not my favorite team as a Bruins fan, but I mean, the brand of hockey that they play with that physicality and everything, it is very fun to watch. And, ultimately, I'm going to be rooting for the Oilers because of a little bit of the bias in me, but the Panthers were my pick to win the Stanley Cup Finals, and from a prediction standpoint, I feel like I kind of have to stick with that, but just know I am going to be rooting for the Oilers. And it's not just pure out of, discontent as a Bruins fan. The Oilers are such a fun and inspiring franchise from pretty much every perspective. First off, the atmosphere in Edmonton, I mean, something that has to be on my bucket list, and I'm sure there are some of the other, top end, if the Maple Leafs could ever sort of actually come through in big moments. We know how diehard their fans are, but haven't necessarily seen the postseason success to fully experience that atmosphere on the biggest stage. But I have been blown away by how awesome it looks in Edmonton from a fan perspective, and the fact that, it was not a very pretty start for them in Game 6 against the Stars, but they were sticking in it the entire time, and ultimately I do think that, the fans do deserve a little bit of credit there, where we've seen, hockey especially, but in professional sports in general now, it feels like we are seeing less and less importance of home, field, court, ice advantage, whatever you want to say. But last night definitely felt like the Oilers had the one-up because they had the fans at their backs. And, like I mentioned, it's every part of this franchise that I think is just so enjoyable. And, a big moment for the NHL as a whole, with Connor McDavid finally making his first the Stanley Cup Finals appearance, being a 3-time Hart Memorial winner, 6-time All-Star, 5-time Art Ross Trophy winner. I mean, he has racked up accolade on accolade, even beyond those. And we saw last night, when his team was in a bind, it was him in that first period getting to work that put them up and allowed them to sort of cruise throughout the rest of the game, where his first goal was just an absolute thing of beauty, weaving outside and back in of multiple Dallas defenders and putting it up in the top right. And then in the second goal that they scored, both of these coming on the power play as well, by the way, which is a massive part of Edmonton, is their special teams. And their power play had gotten off to a pretty slow start through the first 4 or so games of this series, but definitely saw that spark come back where, after, again, a filthy move from McDavid just a few minutes prior, McDavid going down the left side of the ice drew that extra attention, and he was able to dump it into Hyman, who scored from the slot, extended his range maybe a little bit more than he is typically known for, and the Oilers end up using those 2 goals as the lead to be able to close out the Stars. The Stars did score late in this game as well, but ultimately it's the Oilers moving on. And again, I just think that understanding sort of the dynamics of this past game, the fewest shots ever in a conference finals closeout game to win for them. Only 10 shots on net they got, and yet, again, they scored on 2 of them. McDavid on the first opportunity, and then Hyman a couple possessions later. But the record prior to that for the least shots on goal for a conference finals winning team was 17. So smash that record. The worst shot differential for a winning team in a closeout conference championship at -23. And again, it was Connor McDavid leading the way, that power play that we know can be dominant. And also, on the other end, as much as you want to talk about, point differential, Stuart Skinner, who has been very much questioned throughout this postseason run, stepped up in a massive way with 33 saves. So, was really impressive for him. He is somebody who is going to need to be locked in if they want to have a shot against the Panthers this series, because we know how dangerous that team can be. And, if this were to go into a shootout per se between the Oilers and Panthers, obviously not the actual act of a shootout, but in terms of if these are going to be offense-heavy games, I definitely feel like that favors the Panthers, knowing Bobrovsky. You can argue just outdueled Igor Shesterkin, possibly the best goaltender in the NHL. So it's going to be really interesting to see. Vegas currently has, according to DraftKings at least, is what I'm looking at right now, the Panthers as -130 favorites for this series, Oilers +110. So, again, this should be an extremely compelling series. I'm thrilled that we're going to get to see Connor McDavid on this big stage, because, our big boss here at the GSMC Sports Network, Andrew Tate, he's been a little bit of a hesitant hockey enjoyer, but, if Connor McDavid can continue to, play the way that he has been, and, as much as I highlighted the goal and the assists that he had, it's the other stuff too, the hustle plays that he makes, extremely active with his stick, elsewhere and creating those extra chances as well. I mean, he is just tremendous all around. He had the play on defense that helped the Oilers get up the ice to actually draw that first penalty as well. So again, he just does everything for them, and I'm glad that, I think the reason why NHL does struggle ratings-wise to some degree is the marketability of some of their stars, but now we're going to have Connor McDavid on the biggest stage, and it should be a very fun matchup. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm not going to make an official prediction right now, sort of similar to NBA. I'm going to wait a little bit. My lean is definitely with the Panthers right now, but I'm hoping we see an Edmonton championship. But again, give me all of your thoughts in the comments section. We're going to be taking our final break of the show, though, and when we come back on the other side, I want to run through some storylines for NBA free agency this offseason. So stick with us, and we will be right back with our final segment after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. I know that all of the attention right now in the NBA is focused on the finals, and we are going to have tons of coverage about that over the next few weeks. But I do want to sort of look ahead a little bit to the offseason as well in terms of free agency, because overall I don't think that this is going to be quite as stacked of a class as a lot of people sort of do. I don't think it's going to be, tons of noise in terms of shaping contenders in the offseason, but there are some big time moves ahead, and obviously that starts with LeBron James and what is he going to decide to do. I've talked about this a number of times. I think the most likely situation is that he does re-sign with the Lakers. When he did so initially, he actually had it, guaranteed through a number of seasons, and unlike what he did for his final stint, the last few seasons in Miami and in his second stint in Cleveland, it was a very much year-to-year structured contract that allowed him outs at any time. I think that that's probably the direction he heads more back to, where he's going to get paid from the Lakers. He can, which is obviously a big deal for him, and I think that he's probably just going to loosen up sort of his future prospects and his possibility of going elsewhere in years to come, and I would imagine the Lakers are probably going to be on board for that. So I expect him to be with the Lakers for another 1 or 2 seasons. We'll obviously have to see where Bronny gets drafted, because that could be a big factor as well. Also, quick side note, we talked about last week as well the idea of could the Lakers draft Bronny. It is official now. It took place Friday, I want to say, that the Pelicans had the rights to the Lakers draft pick this year. It would have been the 17th overall pick. They could either the Pelicans could either take that one or wait until next season to take the Lakers' first round pick, and they ultimately did decide to defer it. In large part, I would imagine it's because of the reputation surrounding this draft. Now, there could be somebody that could be, a potential role player at the 17th overall pick, but ultimately for the Pelicans, 17 isn't a great spot to pick at anyways, and especially considering, again, the reputation of this draft. So I wasn't shocked by it, but that does leave an extra opportunity for the Lakers to maybe, whether it's using that 17th overall pick directly or maybe trading back and getting a later second rounder to draft Bronny. That's on the table now. So that is something to consider as well. But like I said, ultimately I think that LeBron is going to be staying with the Lakers for the next couple seasons. But if hypothetically he does choose to go somewhere else, how do the Lakers react to that, and where does he decide to go? So I'll start with the Lakers here. I think that the Lakers are in a place right now where they feel like they can be in the realm of contention with LeBron and Anthony Davis. But like we've talked about before, at the previous trade deadline, they chose to not listen to LeBron's hopes and will, I guess that you could say, and hold on to those extra tradable draft picks. So now they still have a little bit more future assets if they would, depending on how they want to act with that. If LeBron leaves, I'm sure they will likely keep that for themselves, and it would be a question of what Anthony Davis's thoughts are, because they could still, especially coming off of this past season, they could definitely move him for a very large haul. Now, obviously, when you are the Lakers and you're the type of brand that you are, you'd rather be competitive, so that's why I think they're going to give LeBron James whatever he wants. They're going to make sure that he and Anthony Davis play out the next few years there in LA and see if maybe they can break through. I think that ultimately the expectations around them shouldn't be championship. That, back-to-back years we've seen them in the play-in tournament. We've talked about this with the Heat in the past. It's just not a sustainable strategy to put yourself at a disadvantage year after year, give yourself extra games at the end of the season, and ultimately end up matching against a top 2 seed every year. And both the Heat and the Lakers made it to at least the conference finals last year as a bottom 2 seed in the conference, but in both situations they catch the break of having to play against, the number one, or in the Lakers case, the number 2 seed in the conference, and kind of get rolled up on because they just are not on the same level of those other teams. And I think that that's just sort of who the Lakers are at this point. So I think that they have a little bit of flexibility of how they want to act this offseason. Again, don't think it's going to be necessary because I think that LeBron's going to be back. But again, running out this hypothetical, where could LeBron James go if he wants to leave? The number one most rumored destination has been Philadelphia because of the money that is available there. The 76ers only have 3 players under contract as things currently stand headed into next season. Joel Embiid, Paul Reed, and Ricky Council IV. Now, Tyrese Maxey, he's a restricted free agent. He is absolutely going to be paid and come back to Philly. But, I think that for the 76ers, is that really any sort of a guaranteed more winning situation than the Lakers are? You're in the Eastern Conference, which is absolutely an advantage over being in the West, considering the depth of both conferences. But again, it's still just a lot of unknown. And we saw this with the coaching search for the Lakers, that LeBron doesn't seem like he wants to be in that same sort of position of holding a lot of power as to what the team does in the offseason with free agency, with their coaching decisions. I think that he just sort of wants to sort of focus on being a player. And again, it's just a lot of unknowns there in Philly. Quickly, some other teams here. Cleveland is an interesting landing spot, obviously going back home to finish off his career. The Cavs should be, legitimately interesting for LeBron in terms of the possibility of winning another championship, which I would imagine is at the top of LeBron's priority list right now. Mitchell would be an elite co-star, and again, very unsure about what his long-term sort of looks like in Cleveland, but if he has a chance to play with LeBron James and win a finals, I think that would be a huge, persuasion point. They have multiple assets that they could trade to shape the team around LeBron and Mitchell. Probably keep one of Evan Mobley or Jarrett Allen. Maybe in this case you go with Allen because he's probably more ready to win a championship than Mobley is, or you keep Mobley because you understand that he is the, higher ceiling long-term piece. Again, Cavaliers already, LeBron or not, have an interesting offseason ahead of them, weighing in the Darius Garland situation as well. Also a team without a head coach. We actually did just get a little mini breaking news that they're going to be interviewing Mike Onori, the assistant coach for the Timberwolves, who was standing on the sidelines while Chris Finch was dealing with his injury this postseason. But ultimately, I think that LeBron's prospects, he could sign wherever he wants to. The Thunder would be another compelling team as well. But ultimately, I feel like the exercise is a little tired out because he is probably going back to LA. And if we get some wind that there is a stronger chance that he isn't going to, I'll be happy to sort of dive into all of those possibilities. But I want to come back to Philly because, like I mentioned, a whole lot of openings on their roster right now with just the 3 guaranteed contracts for next season. Make it 4 with Maxey, but they have this max contract spot available, and it sounds like they are hoping that they can sort of lock down some of their role players, specifically Kelly Oubre and Kyle Lowry were both mentioned in a report from the Philadelphia Inquirer of guys they would like to bring back. Makes sense. Shouldn't be all too expensive. Oubre is definitely going to get a pay raise because last year he was on a dirt cheap contract, and I thought he performed very well for them. The idea, though, of is it a third star that they need? We've sort of seen NBA teams shift away from this idea of, loading up on a big 3, and if you have 2 really, star-studded players surrounded by a lot of extra talent, that is a very feasible roster-building strategy. And I'd say to some degree, obviously the Celtics have the whole super team narrative that also surrounds them, but it's been building around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum for years. And they had all these other role players that sort of, they bought in along the margins of going out to get a Derek White and such. And then it took them to the finals, and now they had an opportunity this past offseason to go all in, get Porzingis and Drew Holiday. But in terms of, signing that traditional third star, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be worth it for Philly. Now, they've been in conversations with the Paul George sweepstakes. I think that is very much possible and would be a pretty good fit for them. He can absolutely outperform what Tobias Harris gave them the past handful of years, and I like Paul George a lot. Now, obviously, he's not the prime version of himself that was an MVP candidate, but still could be somebody who could absolutely step up in big moments. We saw the 76ers struggle a lot in the regular season and in the postseason in the non-Joel Embiid minutes. As much as I love Tyrese Maxey and the future that he has in the NBA, there's still, is he ready necessarily to be, the 1B, call it? Probably not. So you bring Paul George in, and I think that it sort of evenly distributes the basketball. You get a lot of lineup flexibility, I feel like, because Paul George can be a ball handler. I know he's sort of moved all around position-wise throughout the course of his career, but he's somebody who can create for himself and for others. And ultimately, I think the 76ers, as much as, yes, definitely retain the free agents, there are two things they need is another shot creator. Paul George would fit that, granted at a more expensive price, which maybe you disagree with, but get another shot creator, get another backup big, because, Paul Reed's a good player. Mo Bamba's actually sneaky, had his moments, but it was just so clear that was not, viable for them last season when Embiid went down, and again, those backup big minutes just were not good. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But again, shot creator, backup big, those are the top two things for them, and obviously fill out the rest of the roster. We are out of time though, but we're going to be hitting on plenty more NBA free agency as we get closer and closer. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. We are live here on the GSMC Sports Podcast every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. So we will be back tomorrow afternoon. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.